Hey everyone, how is everyone? Let me know if audio's working, if everything's working fine. Hi to the three people here thus far. I was gonna wait a little bit until the chat populates, and then also in terms of like housekeeping, I'm gonna start really quick with this. I um have set up now ads in the channel because like Twitch reached out to me and said like you're a growing channel, so you need to deactivate roll-on ads so that when people log on to your channel, they don't see an ad immediately. And the only way to do that is to incorporate ads into the channel. So we have like a minute and something of ads every hour. So like um, I'm still trying to navigate this. So please, by all means, tell me how this works for you. But yeah, the thing is, we will get um about an hour and 30. Sorry, a minute and 30 seconds of ads every hour or something. So we're only now navigating this, but like in practical terms, what this means is that I'll get an alert saying there's an ad coming up, and then I'll stop doing anything relatively interesting so that you guys can continue to follow the channel. And when we're doing anything particularly interesting, I'm just gonna, what do you call it? Snooze the ad so that it doesn't interrupt. But yeah, so right now, just as a warning, in the next minute and a half, more or less, there's gonna be an ad. Apologies for that. Um, but yeah, let me know if the audio is working or if I'm just not really making any sounds. Um, so if anyone can let me know, I would thank you. Um, and yeah, and so I wanted to start with a little bit of discussion on works fine. Thanks, Boulevard of Dreams. Um, I wanted to start with a little bit of discussion on housekeeping stuff while people start arriving. The first one is that one. The first one is that in a minute you will have an ad. Like I said, I probably not do much while you guys are in ads. I need to balance this out because some people are in jurisdictions where there are no ads, and some people are in jurisdictions where there are ads, and so I cannot just like stay silent or go for a glass of water, which reminds me, I forgot my glass of water, so I'll get thirsty today. Um, and so I'll we can just try to manage this as we go forward. Um, I won't snooze the first ad that's coming up in like 30 seconds because I think it's good to get it out of the way. I'll say again, I'll try this for this not to be an inconvenience. Other than that, things that I do have like some interesting announcements coming up. We already gave a sneak preview to those of you who came to see me play The Last of Us. So I will I'll announce it in a little bit. It's something really cool, so just don't go away with the incoming ad. Um, but yeah, we've had a busy slash not that busy week, which is interesting. um, because on the one hand, some small stuff have happened, like the ICC um, prosecutor has responded to its um, to the observations filed to his request for arrest warrants at the ICC. I have not had the chance to read that yet, so chances are, if we talk about that, we'll do it relatively shortly. Um, And the other thing that happened, Brazil and Colombia have refused to recognize the Maduro uh, government. So that happened in Latin America, if you're interested in Latin American politics. Um, and I think you should be going on an ad in a minute, so I won't announce the really big thing. Well, I will say that today, I will need to stream a little bit less than usual because like I have something to do in the evening. This is why I brought the time of the stream an hour forward. Um, yeah, so right now, see, for example, right now, most of you that are in jurisdictions with ads should be in an ad for the next minute. So you'll be sort of like, I guess, missing out on whatever I'm saying right now. Um, but um, other. So can you tell me if any of you is not getting an ad right now? It's not many of us, just six of us today. So yeah, I think everyone's on an ad break. Should be a short one though. Anyways, just one thing that we need to like deal with, um, given the way that Twitch works. Um, Hopefully, it won't be too much of an inconvenience. Okay, so today I think one thing that would be interesting to do, since the week was relatively calm, um, although it's picking up right now because I was just reading before logging on that Israel is launching an attack on a quote unquote preemptive attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we can talk about that as well. But I thought, given okay, ad ended, so you should all be back now. And okay, so what I was saying is, I think uh, now the week has been going on in a um, it's starting to pick up now with Israel's decision to launch a quote unquote preemptive attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we can definitely talk about like all of the small contained like aspects, things that have been happening during the week. So if you have any questions, just sure, by all means, just let me know, and we can sort of have a general talk. But I was thinking about talking about international law per se, and what it's been, what it is, and what it can be later on. I think someone suggested this on Twitter as a potential topic for discussion. Okay, since you are all back now, and we have a good solid 10 people watching, I thought I'd make the announcement. So thanks to Boulevard of Dreams, he's one of the followers in the channel. Thanks to his like very generous um, donation of his time and effort, he has now produced our very own Discord group. And I'm super excited. It's really cool. I really have no idea how he did it. I am not a technological person. I don't know how to do these things. But he does, or well, they do. I actually don't know your gender. Um, and so please everyone help me, thank Boulevard of Dreams for creating a Discord channel for us. I will be sharing the invite link to our Discord server here on the chat, and it would be really cool if I can see you there and you can um use it as the whole point of this experiment that we're doing is to create a community of people that are interested in international law and international relations, politics, and like stuff like that, things that happen in the world. And so one of the problems with Twitter is that when you um, start discussing, the algorithm is designed to bring a group of people that are very angry at you, um, and and so you end up fighting. You don't actually discuss, you don't actually learn, you don't actually engage. You just fight, and that's just terrible. Like as someone who teaches for a living, Twitter is a terrible environment to learn. So I don't want to do that in Twitter. The less we can engage, fighting and yelling and getting angry, the better. Um, but then there's Twitch, where yeah, you come here and it's now 10 of you, and you listen to me talk and you ask questions through chat. It's a lot more interactive and it's great. I love it. I'm having a great time with this channel, and I really want it to grow, and I want you guys to like follow, subscribe, and make an ever-growing community. But then some of you, it's 220 followers, but some of you really like engaging, and you've been reaching out to me on Twitter. You've been reaching out to me, trying to reach out to me on Twitch because I don't have Whispers active yet. I need to figure that out. Um, and you guys want to continue engaging and learning and talking and discussing. So I think yeah, I agree with Iconoclast 94, Discord offers us that space, that safe space to build a community where we can talk about stuff that we talk about in this channel in a safe environment where no one is going to, come here and troll. And if they do, we'll just block them because it's not like, quote unquote, the town square of Twitter where I personally don't like blocking. I just mute. Um, it is a private space, well, not private, it's a public space, but like for people that have a common interest. So no trolling, no aggression allowed. You know, so it'll be a very healthy environment that I think we can grow and yeah, I think generally I'm very excited about what will happen to this space, to our new Discord channel. So please do, yeah, follow the Twitch, subscribe to the Twitch if you can. But if you're interested in these topics, by all means, just join the Discord. I'll be there. I've been hanging out there a lot. It's not a lot of us yet. It's like one, two, three, four, five, six, seven of us, and three bots. Um, but please join because I think it'll be very interesting. I'm very curious to see where we are taking this community forward. Okay, so that's the big announcement that I had. And again, please thank Boulevard of Dreams for all of the tireless work. Um, and it'll be very interesting to see you in the Discord channel. The link is on the chat. Um, wait, chat over there. Um, So yeah, hold on. M. Bentley, welcome to the stream and to the channel. First time chat. Waiting for this stream to ask you your views on how international law regulates the opening of gates of dams close to its borders without notifying the bordering state and causing flood in it. I think recently India did it and worsened the flood in Bangladesh. Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, so generally, that would be covered in the regime of state responsibility, which means that whenever a state conducts anything, any act that can have transboundary harm, um, it needs to provide compensation or reparation or satisfaction to whatever harm. So if India has created a flood in Bangladesh, then yeah, theoretically they should engage in diplomatic exchanges and find a proper restitution, like to bring back as best as possible the situation to the situation before the damage, right? Which is not always easy, and when it's not easy, then compensation rules apply, which is you pay money. Um, there is an ICJ case that the name I forgot. It's a tricky name that deals with this. Uh, I'll remember in a second and I'll let you know. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you have any more specific questions, but other than that, sure. Transboundary damage needs to be compensated under international law. There are draft articles on in state responsibility that are generally considered customary law and that states use for these kinds of problems. Hopefully, theoretically, there will be access to the International Court of Justice if diplomacy fails. But yeah, the International Court of Justice is not mandatory jurisdiction, as you probably know. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's the first question MN Bentley does. So welcome. Um, so I thought before we move forward, before we continue, if you have any other questions, let me know. Um, but then let's start talking about like the general topic that I was gonna talk about this week, and then if you have any other questions while I'm talking, that's just sorry. Iconoclast 94 says hi. There have been some movements regarding the ICC prosecutors' arrest warrants. What are the next steps? How long will it take for the judges to react to prosecutors' response? Oh well. Okay. Cool. So what's happened is that so okay, the prosecutor for the ICC requested arrest warrants, as we all know, to a chamber, pretrial chamber of the ICC, and usually, normally, these requests are sealed, meaning that they are secret. No one knows that they have been submitted until the moment when they are granted by the chamber, and then they become arrest warrants, not no longer requests. Um, Usually that's what happens. But because we're dealing with a very contentious, very controversial case, the prosecutor decided instead to submit these requests out in the open with everyone aware that the requests had been made. And in order to sort of like protect his own back, he convened a panel of experts that sort of said, we agree with the prosecutor's idea, the prosecutor's um, um, you know request. And this was a panel composed of many like highly regarded experts, all of them based in the United Kingdom. Among them, for example, Marko Milanovic, who's a professor in the UK, who's a super well known guy, and a really nice guy as well. And let's say like a very prominent, very positivist down to the black letter law kind of academic that would like not join to anything that wasn't serious. So the idea was to say this is a serious request. And then also, for example, Amal Clooney, who, as you know, is a lawyer and an activist on international issues, um, also very well known and has a lot of media exposure. So basically, the prosecutor was trying to cover his back, right? Saying it's not just me. Look, a lot of these like big shiny people agree with me. And so I guess the plan was to say, okay, this is unimpeachable. There's nothing that can go wrong because look at the panel of experts that I have, etc., etc. Right? Um, but what ended up happening, the I guess the problem is that because everyone knew that the arrest warrants were coming, um, the United Kingdom under the Tory government, so the Conservative government, decided to request a right to intervene in as like provide observations and say this is I'm not entirely certain that this is correct, that these arrest warrants should be given, should be granted. And I guess um, that was in itself a tricky situation for the chamber because this would not happen if the requests had gone in through a sealed procedure. No one would know. So there would be no opportunity to submit observations at that stage, right? So um, the chamber had to decide whether it opened up the floor to observations in this scenario or not. If you ask me, given that arrest warrants are a matter of urgency, like you generally don't want them to take too long, the chamber should have just granted them without allowing the UK to intervene with observations. Um, but given that this is such a controversial topic, um, the chamber accepted it. The chamber said, "Okay, let's allow the United Kingdom to submit observations." And of course, once they did that, that sort of opened up the floodgates for everyone else who wanted to intervene. So um, there's I think Lindsey Graham submitted observations, like everyone submitted observations, with the main argument being that according to many of the submissions requesting observations, and theoretically, allegedly, the United Kingdom as well, because the United Kingdom eventually ended up not submitting its request for its brief for observations because of the change of government. Um, the general vibe of these observations is well, but the the state of Palestine, or in this case the Palestinian Authority, or whoever has signed to the ICC, whoever is the member of the ICC, because the state of Palestine is the member of the ICC, doesn't really have a right to submit a case to the ICC, even though it's a member, even though the court has jurisdiction, um, because the PLO, as the representative of Palestinian people, signed the Oslo Agreement with Israel, meaning that a lot of like the powers that the PLO has as the representative of the Palestinian people um, will be assigned, either suspended or assigned to Israel as a way of like regularizing the occupation. So that's the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement basically says we're going to divide Palestinian land into different areas, area A, B, and C. And in different areas, the Palestinian Authority will have more power, and in other areas, Israel will have more power. And so one of the things that's in the Oslo Agreement is that Palestine, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, created by the Oslo Agreement, does not have the right to prosecute Israeli soldiers. And so the argument by several of those that submitted their own observations was, if Palestine doesn't have the right to prosecute Israeli soldiers by itself, then it cannot delegate um, the that power to the ICC, and therefore Palestine would be a member of the ICC, but would not be able to enforce the ICC because of Oslo, which was of course hugely controversial because it's against this, it's again this like vibe of except for Palestine, right? Which is a recurrent theme in international law. Like everyone gets to do X except for Palestine. So everyone gets to be a member of the ICC if they choose so, except for Palestine. So a lot of other states and experts and scholars submitted their own observations. I almost submitted mine, but I was in the middle of like changing jobs, so it was very difficult for me to find time to like write something up. But many of my friends and colleagues submitted amazing um, interventions and observations. I would recommend that you check out Adil Hack's intervention. I will probably I'll write his name in the chat. Where is it? Here. Or John Quigley's, also very good. Both I would recommend. Um, Very interesting stuff. And yeah, in general, so after that, after experts and states submitted their own observations, then the victims submitted their own observations, like Palestinian victims or representatives of the victims, um, and then the prosecutor this past week, uh, essentially read everyone's opinion and submitted his responses to these requests. Um, I haven't yet read the prosecutor's response to the observations. Um, I understand that what he's arguing is that, of course, he's arguing against the view that the Oslo Accords limit the jurisdiction of the ICC, which I think is the correct analysis. I don't think I don't think that you can say that you can, by agreement, create impunity for human rights violators or like international criminals. I don't think those agreements, even if you could argue that they would not be valid as a matter of international law, because international crimes are matters of jus cogens, so you cannot limit that, jurisdiction. But yeah, so I think that's the correct view, but I haven't read the actual response to the observations. So what happens next is the chamber needs to make up its mind, needs to decide, and then eventually decide whether to grant or not grant the arrest warrants. Once the arrest warrants are issued, meaning that there's reasonable grounds to presume that Netanyahu has, and Gallant have committed the crimes that they are accused of, then ICC member states would need to comply and enforce those orders, and so Netanyahu and Gallant would not be able to travel to those states because then they would otherwise be arrested. Right. So, when will that happen? It should happen relatively soon now because it's been a long time for delay. So yeah, we don't know when, but I would argue that it is a matter of weeks, not months. It's not days, but it's not months. I would say weeks. Um, Sorry, just one oh no, sorry, MN Bentley says thanks for the welcome and answer. It is a great opportunity to take free Q&A from a prof at LSE. Yeah, thanks for that. Full disclosure, I am a fellow at LSE. No, so the academic profession has different like hierarchies. You know, like when you go to a law firm and you have like the senior partner and the named partner and then the associate, the junior associate. Academia works in similar fashion. So professor, at least in the United Kingdom, other countries do it differently. Professor is like the highest possible rank, which grants you tenure and like all sorts of privileges and benefits. And then you start going down, right? You get like assistant professor, senior lecturer, then like um, my role as a fellow, and then like postdoc, and then you start going down. So I'm not at the highest level of the academic career. In Peru, I used to be an associate professor. Then I moved to the UK, and now I'm a fellow. And I've been, like, lecturer as well. So, like, um, just to explain a little bit how academia works. I'm curious if people would be interested in knowing a little bit more of academia as a career path, because, like, that's something that I can talk a lot about, and I get questions on that a lot as well. So if you are interested, by all means, let me know, and we can talk about that. Um, I'm right. So let's see more questions. But yeah, happy to answer your questions, Amin Benley. Just one person out there says, "Hi, I have a question about preemptive strikes. I have read that if there is an imminent threat, they can be used. Does Israel attack against Lebanon can be considered as preemptive strike?" Okay, cool. This is a really good question. Thank you so much. So there's a lot to unpack in the topic of preemptive strikes. Um, we have discussed in LSE, fellow at LSE equals lecturer everywhere else. Yes, that is true. Fellow at LSE means lecturer everywhere else. It's just the different names that universities use. Thanks for that. But yeah, if anyone is interested in knowing more about what the difference between a senior lecturer, a fellow, or a lecturer is, or a professor, by all means, we can chat about that. It means that we have a PhD basically. um, okay, so preemptive strikes. This is a very interesting topic. I really enjoyed discussing it, so thank you for the question. I should warn you guys that there will be an ad in 6 minutes and 50 seconds, so just you start preparing. Um, if I'm in the middle of the explanation, though, I'll snooze it. So preemptive strikes. Just okay. We've discussed before, in one of our streams before this one, that the legal rationale for using force under international law and modern international law is um, either you have authorization from the Security Council, so the Security Council says you can go attack, or you have consent of the state in question, so the state says you can come in and attack in my territory, or you're acting in self defense, meaning that someone struck first. That is the main thing here. What is self-defense, right? So the notion of a preemptive strike um, is a tricky one to discern. From what point on can you say that you are being attacked? Right? At what point? Like, let's take an example of, like, two people that are gonna go into a fight. Who strikes first? The person that punches first, or the person that uh, goes to extends their arm to grab a baseball bat to strike with a baseball bat? Who's the one who's acting in self defense, right? If we measure punching someone as the moment of the attack, then you would need to be wait until you're punched to say, "Oh, I'm acting in self defense." Right? So if someone is um, launching themselves against you, and they already started their attack, you don't need to wait for them to, like, grab you for you to be able to respond, right? That's the general theory of what a preemptive strike is. Okay. um Fled from nowhere says you're not at the top of the food chain. Not yet. um so okay, so thinking in those terms, in terms of um uh someone has already started their attack. What can we know when about preemptive strikes when it's about states, or in this case, international law in general? Let's table the conversation of whether non-state armed groups can engage in international behavior and armed attacks for a later time. Let's assume, for the sake of argument here, that that's irrelevant. Okay, that either non-state actors can actually engage in armed attacks and therefore are included in the UN Charter regime. I don't believe that, but let's assume it so that this is easier and simpler, or that we're just talking about states. Okay, and I want to bring you back to a case that it's called the Caroline incident. Um, and it's very famous, very very famous in the global north. I never studied it growing up in Peru, because like in Peru you don't really study international law in the same way as you study um, in the global north. We had a lot more focused on what do you call it, national liberation movements. We had a lot more focus on international economic law. We had a lot more discussion on treaty making. War and use of force and non-state actors was not a lot of like the content that I was taught. I learned a lot of this when I went to do my master's in the US, when I did my PhD in the UK. Um, but in Peru, like a country that hasn't had a lot of wars, that was not something that was insisted upon. But since the global north is so prone to like going into wars, they are more, let's say, more obsessed with this. So, what is the Caroline incident? So, the Caroline incident is this scenario that happened in 1837 in the border between the United States and Canada. Back then, the United States was already independent, but Canada was not. Okay, Canada was still part of the British Empire. And just so you know, there's an ad coming in 2 minutes. Um, and so, what is it that what happened? Let's say so. There was a rebellion in Canada. Canadian rebels revolted against the British. And many in the United States were saying we should help the Canadian rebels because, like, we are also, descendants of rebels. Um, and so they started helping the Canadians through a steamer, through a ship, a boat called the Caroline. That's why it's called the Caroline incident. I know that questions are accumulating. I will answer them. Just give me a second, okay? Just to wrap up the idea, or I will get to them. And so when the British found the Caroline navigating in upper, I think it was in upper New York, if I'm not mistaken, um, near Niagara Falls, um, they decided that they needed to intervene and destroy the ship, the Caroline, in U.S. territory in self-defense because it was necessary to avoid the rebellion. The United States complained when the Caroline was destroyed and said, "Why are you attacking my territory? You did not need to attack my territory." And the attack had not started, let's say. That was not enough for you to say that you had to recourse to self defense. And both the United States and the United Kingdom sort of agreed with the standard that uh, for self defense, you needed to show, this is a quote, the necessity of self defense. You need to show that the necessity of self defense was instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation. Right? The necessity of the self defense was instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation. Those are the four things that they like set out, and they all agreed that that was the standard. They just didn't agree that destroying that ship that's just transporting weapons had left no moment of deliberation. The British said yes, the US said no. Eventually the US apologized. And so for a long time, this standard was the standard that the global north used to decide when an attack was imminent and therefore necessarily required self-defense. Right? Those four words: instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means, and no moment of deliberation. Those four terms. Right. So when you have that, theoretically, the armed attack started, and you can recur to self-defense. Right. So, for example, a clear case: when German panzers crossed the border between Poland and Germany in World War II, they had already been mobilized to attack Poland. Poland could strike those tanks even if those tanks had not crossed the border yet, because the attack was meant to destroy Poland. So Poland did not need for those tanks to attack it for it to be the start of the armed attack. The armed attack started, um, the armed attack, the armed attack started later. Um, So, um, the arm attack had already started. Sorry. So, in the context of Israel, there's a very famous case of supposed preemptive use of force. That is the Six Day War. Israel attacked Egypt, Egyptian tanks, and the Jordanian Air Force and the Syrian Air Force, sorry, preemptively because according to them, an armed attack was imminent. The general argument that Israel gives for the Six Day War is that Egypt had blocked the Straits of Tiran to Israeli passage. But then again, that's not the start of an armed attack. That's you know, they blocked passage to to Israeli ships, and that's it. So there's a lot of debate about whether the Six Day War was preemptive or not. I actually think it was unlawful in the way that it was carried out because there was still no need to launch an armed attack in self-defense. There was no armed attack incoming or anything like that. So when you analyze the current situation, you need to think of whether there is any other way of acting. So, for example, if a missile is coming against Israel, absolutely Israel has the right to stop that missile because there's an arms attack. Israel also has the right to shoot the missile launcher from where that was launched. Of course, assuming that humanitarian rules prevail and there's not like 15 children around the missile launcher, right? But Israel has a right to respond in immediately and destroy that missile launcher. Every second that passes after that immediate strike, that immediate launch, weakens the case because there's eventually a point where Israel's attack will then become a retaliation. And retaliation is different from self defense. Retaliation is an eye for an eye, bloody nose for my bloody nose. And that is just not um, legal. You cannot have like a series of retaliations one against another. So, for example, when Israel stroke the Iranian consulate in Damascus, that was an armed attack. Iran could have stopped that armed attack as it was unfolding. Once it finished, though, once the consulate was destroyed, when Iran sent missiles to Israel, that was a retaliation. That was not acting in self-defense because, again, the standard was not met. Right? There was no other way that you could have reacted. The attack had ended. There was no imminent need to respond. And when Israel responded to the Iranian attack, there was another retaliation. So missile warfare is usually retaliatory in nature and usually illegal on the part of who does it. So I guess I don't want to tell you what to believe, but I guess the point would be: is Israel responding to an immediate attack that has not yet started? Is it responding to an ongoing attack that is continuous? That's what determines whether this is preemptive or not. So if Israel itself is saying this is a preemptive strike, then it is saying I am attacking them before they attack me, and that's just not how international law works. Either the attack has already started, you just have not been hit yet, and there's an imminent need to respond to that attack, or you're attacking first. If you're attacking first so that someone doesn't attack you eventually at some point in time, that's not legal. So I'll leave it up to you because I don't think we have enough facts right now to know what exactly is going on with the current Israeli operation in southern Lebanon. But as far as I'm concerned, the dynamic between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah, has usually been either retaliatory or preemptive, not self-defense. Right. So bear that in mind. Okay, that was a long answer for a short question. Venture capitalists. I like that. Is it accurate to say that if in a war, belligerent A breaks one of the rules of war vis-a-vis enemy belligerent B, B is no longer bound to obey the same rule vis-a-vis A? Let's use for the example the killing of civilians as collateral damage. Is that correct? As far as I understand, in World War II, the Germans bombed lots of civilians in London and other parts of England, and England rightly retaliated in similar way on Germany. Oh, this is an excellent question. Okay, so this has to do. This actually has to do with what's written down there, past, present, and future of international law, because this international law has changed over time. And I think it is important to acknowledge that. So, when you use World War II as an example, you need to understand that World War II happened before the Geneva Conventions and before the UN Charter, two of the most important treaties in modern international law. So, let's put it this way. Before, yes, the way international law worked, especially in times of war, was you would have two states engaging in hostilities, and states expected civilians to stay quiet in their homes. Those like Napoleonic battles where you have two armies in a huge field, and like the general of one army like tips his hat to the other, um, and so on. Um, those battles were supposed to happen in the fields, so civilians would not be around. So civilians should stay home. Now, if civilians took part in hostilities, so take for example during the Napoleonic Wars when Napoleon conquered Spain. When Napoleon conquered Spain, he did exactly what military strategies at the time told him to do. Capture all the cities. Once you capture all the cities, the war ends because that's it. You defeated all the armies, right? That's war. But Spanish people in the 1800s, in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 19th century, had already developed a sense of nationalist pride, which was a new phenomenon for Europe, and decided, you know what? Yeah, the king is defeated, but we're not. And so they launched what they called a small war, or in Spanish, a guerrilla, or in English now, guerrilla. So they said, we will take it upon ourselves to defend our land because war is no longer a battle between two royal houses that exchange territory and that's it. This is my land now. It's not the king's land, it's my land. And I'm going to fight for it. And so they launched a guerrilla, an insurgency, to expel the French. And if you read the writings of Henri de Jomini, Napoleon's military strategy, which I did, um, he was just baffled. It's like, what is this? Like, what do you mean that I conquer every city and you still take up arms against me? This is unacceptable. Um, why are civilians fighting? And so, in the context of these like new realities, um, European armies started to conclude that if civilians take up arms in hostilities, then they should be punished. So they started a practice called the taking up of hostages, meaning that you went into a town. This happened a lot in the Franco-Prussian War. The Prussians would go to a town, and then the French were defeated pretty easily in the Franco-Prussian War. Rose up, civilians rose up in arms, and then the Prussians arrived in the town, and they would grab, let's say, the mayor and the most popular guy in town, and they would sit them down in a train, and they would like transport their ammo in that train so that if you attacked that train or if you revolted in any way, the civilian hostages would be killed. And that was seen as the way war works because there was a retaliatory, it was a reprisal for a violation of international law. This is what who was it? A venture capitalist says. He says like if you violate the laws of war, then I don't need to comply with them. And so this was think of this ingrained in a situation where the nations of Europe were dealing with a new kind of war with nationalist guerrillas, and they didn't know what to do with these civilians that were all of a sudden participating in conflict. Why are you doing this? Was like sort of like the argument. You should stay in your homes and not bother. This is war is the sport of princes, of kings and royals, not of civilians. You should be home. And so it was sort of a way to disincentivize civilians from taking up arms and joining the conflict. Um, but of course, I mean, the nationalist genie had come out the bottle, and there was no putting it back in. People were no longer just pawns in the royal house's game. They were proud of their countries, and they would take up arms in defense of them. Um, so, sorry, venture capitalist has asked something. He says they saw targeting armed civilians engaged in hostilities against them as fair targets as well. Yes, of course. If you're that's actually in the Franco-Prussian War, the French civilians that took up arms referred to themselves, and they were referred by the Germans, the Prussians, as Franktireurs, like Frank meaning free, Tireur meaning to shoot. So those who shot freely. And that developed into the Spanish word francotirador, which is the Spanish word for sniper. So yes, these civilians were valid targets, and in fact they were punished for participating in hostilities when they didn't have a right to participate in hostilities. Right, that was the general, vibe. Um, oh, I just noticed that you guys went on an ad pause, and I didn't even notice. Sorry about that. I'll warn you. I'll be more aware of this. Um, so however, that developed that same rationale transferred to World War II, because World War II was fought with that same mindset. Was probably the last war to be fought with that mindset. Um, that you could just execute a hostage as a way of keeping your uh, the civilians at bay, right? And so the Germans had a let's say a similar practice of taking hostages. Um, this is something that sort of broke international law at the time. Um, and for example, this was something that was discussed in the Nuremberg trials, um, where the Nuremberg trials argued that these guerrillas, the Franktireurs, could be subjected to the death penalty, and so it was legal to actually um, execute captured partisans, right? But at the time, also, like, it's it was recognized that it was a tricky thing to conclude, because then um, there are the where do you draw the line between the partisan and just starting to gather a bunch of civilians and executing them? So the Nuremberg tribunals didn't really end the practice of taking up of prisoners, but there was some sense of sensibility, like this is messed up, particularly because it was the Nazis, right? There was this like idea that they had done something fully unfair. There's a famous trial that called the hostages trial. Um, and so when the nations of Europe got together, and I mean not just of Europe, the nations of the world got together to discuss updates on the law of international humanitarian law, like the law of war, for the Geneva Conventions. Given some political developments, including the fact that, say, for example, the Soviet Union participated in the negotiation of the Geneva Conventions, and the Soviet Union was very much in favor of civilians participating in conflict, because that's how you got the revolutionary wars that created communist states. Um, so these states sort of like started incorporating protections for civilians into the documents. There's a very interesting book by a friend of mine called Boyd van Dyck. He's a Dutch scholar who wrote a book called Preparing for War. I think I have yeah, I have it here. I'm gonna put it on the chat, and I'll add it as well to the in our Discord. There is a channel specifically designed for where I will put all of these reading recommendations for you. But if you want to read it, this is the book that explains how the Geneva Conventions were negotiated. Um, and he argues that there was a lot of human rights thinking incorporated into the Geneva Conventions because of what had happened in World War II, and that clashed a lot with the need by the U.S. and the U.K. of like maintaining some level of uh, the previous international law, the international law of hostages, the international law of killing franc-tireurs on site and stuff like that, because they were worried about what was going to happen to war. If war was too humanized, then it wouldn't be war, right? So there was a lot of tensions in the negotiation between those who wanted um, to incorporate humanitarian values, like the International Committee for the Red Cross, and those who wanted um, to maintain, certain flexibility uh, for war and keep war a little bit terrible, to safeguard the need to act in military necessity. And in the middle, of course, the Soviet Union saying, "Oh, but wouldn't it be great if, like, there was such a thing as non-international armed conflicts where civilians can participate in hostilities?" Right. So check that book out; it's really good. I really like it. Um, but so one of the results coming out of the Geneva Conventions was that this idea of um, reciprocity was eliminated from international law. Under modern international law, if one party to the armed conflict violates the rules of war, then that means nothing. That means that you are still obligated to comply with the rules yourself. Because otherwise, you end up in that situation where you decide what the punishment is and you end up punishing innocent civilians for the crimes of other people and for geopolitical reasons. And that's just not fair. So, to answer the question specifically, it's not accurate to say, venture capitalist, that nowadays you can violate the laws of war if someone else violates the laws of war first. That's not how it works. And yes, people might use World War II examples on you because those examples are before the emergence of the Geneva Conventions where these rules were eliminated. So that's what's going on. I don't know if that helps you, if that solves the, the question. Let me know. Edward SVM says, "Will we have time today to talk about the right to resist Hamas and others? When does it cross over to terrorism?" Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much for making it, Edward SVM. So, this is a tricky topic. It's a sensitive topic for a lot of people, and it's something I can empathize with. Like, you guys know that I'm from Peru, and Peru had its own armed conflict in the 80s and between 80s 90s, more or less, around the time where I was born. I was born in 85. Conflict went from around 80 to around early 2000s. Um, and it is unnerving. Um, it is a something to deal with, to feel, oh my God, someone wants to kill me. That is difficult to process. Um, so when we're talking about the right of resistance, I do want to make it very clear, um, that we should discuss this, being fully aware that what we are discussing is also war and is political violence, and that generates, um, that requires us to do it with empathy, so that we understand the position that everyone is in. Okay, so just bear with me while I make a longer explanation. Okay, because I think it's very important to like approach these topics not from rage, not like in Twitter, but in a technical way. Okay, and this works both ways because when you say your opinion on the right of resistance, either the people who are resisting will say you're not going far enough, or the people who are being resisted will say, why are you justifying someone exercising violence against me? So I can understand the complexities of the right of resistance. And I also know that we are, discussing this in a narrow, you know, legal environment where, depending on what you say, that can be misconstrued. Um, you can end up like in legal trouble. So whenever you're discussing this, be very careful about what you say because you do not want to, as you say, confuse the right of resistance with the justification of unlawful use of force or even lethal use of force. So just so you know, as a prior question, I want to be very clear. I'm trying to be very careful of how I approach this topic so that I can approach it with sensitivity towards both resisting and those being resisted, in as far as they are civilians, right? Because in war, if you tell me that there's two belligerent parties, then it's war. But for civilians, for our everyday people, it is a topic that requires a little bit of like understanding. So bear with me, okay? Is there a right of resistance or not under international law? This is a very common question, and the answer is yes. There, does definitely exist a right of resistance in international law. It includes the right to armed resistance. It includes the right to take up arms and go fight an oppressive regime, either because of colonialism or racial segregation or foreign domination. Right? So you have that right. There is a lot of arguments on how far that right of resistance goes. There's a very famous scholar um, called Frantz Fanon, um, who argued that anti-colonial struggle needed to be violent. It required you to use violence to liberate yourself, and that violence has severe psychological effects on those conducting it. So on those exercising colonial violence, um, and that the violence of the colonizer also exercised colonial violence on the colonized. So the colonized is in a situation where it cannot escape the trauma of the violence of the colonizer and the violence that they need to exercise to liberate themselves from the colonial yoke. So it's a very complicated situation. So he argues he's regularly called like this, like apologist for violence. I don't really think that. There's a famous phrase by Fanon that says um, anti-colonial violence is not about going around looking for a quote settler to shoot. There needs to be some sort of like political objective in your um, act of resistance. I wrote an article. Let me get it on this if you are interested, and I will put it in the chat so that you can read a little bit more about Fanon and how to have an interpretation of the right of resistance that is in conformity with I something that I think is very important with human rights. Right. So you can read it. I wrote that. I just put it in the chat. Um, and so um, because we acknowledge the massive trauma that comes from violence, and of course, there's different approaches. Not everyone agrees with Fanon that the only way to overcome colonial oppression is through mass violence. Um, Judith Butler, for example, they say um, they prefer uh, non-violent means. I don't really think that you can achieve liberation from colonialism exclusively through non-violent means. I think the history of the world, I mean, Peru recourse to violence to end colonial Spanish domination. The United States recourse to violence to end British colonial domination. So I do think that is um oh, we got spam. I do think that recourse to violence is often necessary in independentist processes. So the question is, what makes that resistance lawful and what doesn't? Since we are saying that resistance can be violent or non-violent, it's usually violent. Once it's violent, what can you do? And the rules of war continue to apply to that resistance, right? So again, you cannot kill civilians. You cannot kill people that are out of combat. There are a lot of things that you cannot do. So often you will hear the phrase that resistance is has to be carried out uh, by any means necessary. This is a common quote. Resist by any means necessary. You cannot judge how I choose to resist, right? And I personally I disagree with that view. I don't think you can say that resistance needs to be done by any means necessary. By any means necessary is a quote, is a phrase by Malcolm X. He used to say it in his speeches, and it is meant as a political phrase. If you take it literally by any means necessary, you can justify all sorts of horrible things, all sorts of illegal things. And if I understand the right of resistance in the way that Fanon does, meaning it is necessary. You need to engage in violence to liberate yourself. If you understand it that way, even Fanon said, no, no, wait a minute. Just wanton violence, violence for the sake of violence, will also end up harming the colonized as they liberate themselves. So that violence, even the huge levels of unrestrained violence that Fanon justified, needs to be channeled to a specific political objective, which he called the new humanity, the new world of like a post-colonial society. If you don't have that political objective, then your wanton violence will be useless. It will be politically useless. Of course, other scholars say, like Judith Butler will say, the more violent your rebellion, your resistance, the more difficult it will be for your post-colonial state to rule itself peacefully, because we all accept that this anti-colonial violence will also have a traumatic effect on those deploying it, right? So the war of liberation will also make you traumatized, and traumatized people rarely um, are able to create like peaceful utopian societies. So try to reduce that violence to the most possible, Judith Butler would say, right? So um, what I'm trying to say with this is like, you have someone who believes in non-violence like Judith Butler, and you have someone that believes in extreme violence like Fanon, and both of them are telling you, but there need to be some limits. So this by any means necessary doesn't really cut it. I don't find it. Um, um, I guess I don't find it moral. Um, and luckily, it's also not the legal argument, because when the United Nations sat down to discuss um, the right of resistance, particularly in the context of Palestine, but also in the context of South Africa, the UN General Assembly sat down to negotiate a specific um, document that described what this right of resistance implied. Um, they came up with. I'm gonna see if I can find that. Hold on, UNGA resolution. Um, Let me see. Available. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna paste this on the chat so that you guys can see it. Um, this is United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3743. Um, it says, and this is, I don't know what year this is from, but it's from the 70s, 1982. Yeah, 1982. So it's the importance of the universal realization of the right of peoples to self-determination and of the speedy granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples for the effective guarantee and observance of human rights. Right. So um, this resolution, if you go to where is it? Operative clause number 2. Let me see if I can put it on the screen. I recently learned how to put these things on the screen, um, and it is really fun. Hold on. Okay, let me see if I can put it on the screen. I need to save it. Uh, Save, and then I go to sources, image. Uh, Hold on a second, please. There you go. Oh, this was cool. You should be seeing it now. It should be like on top of my face. Let me know if it isn't. I made it a little bit bigger. Uh, did that work? Yeah, okay, awesome. Oh, I'm gonna do this much more often now. So this is operative clause 2 of that UNGA resolution. And it says that it reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation. And this is the really key part of it all. By all available means, including armed struggle. There's an ad starting soon, so I'm not going to explain this right now. I'll let you see the ad, and then I'll explain this in more detail, okay? So I'll explain it again once the ad is done. Um, but, okay, so what does this mean? And let me see, there's another question here. So, Threat from Nowhere says, so resistance doesn't justify all acts of violence. Settler or colonialist civilians are still off the table when it comes to anti-colonial violence. Only military targets are fair targets in that case. Yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to say. So right now, you guys are in ads, so I will wait for a second. Hold on. Thank you. I will explain this in detail after the ads. Yeah, no worries. This is how, I mean, we need to figure things out going forward. But so is everyone on an ad right now? Does anyone want to say like, oh, I'm not in an ad right now? There's 4 people in the chat, so very few of us. I think everyone is on an ad. Okay, I'll wait for you guys then. Please let me know when the ad is over. I also have it here. I'm one of the lucky ones. Oh, Razanov, how are you? Thanks for joining the Discord, by the way. You're one of the lucky ones. Well, the ad will end in 16 seconds, so it's fine. So okay, so we were talking about this like operative part two. Oh, by the way, Razanov, are you like based outside of Europe? Is that why you don't have ads? Or like outside the United States? Are you one of my Global South followers or not? Um, okay, so let's go back to operative paragraph two. It says reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. Razanov is in the EU, but he doesn't gets ads. Okay, so you're a really lucky one. So what I wanted to say with this is, when the UN got together, it said, yes, of course, you do have a right to take up arms against colonial domination. But that's not a free check. That's not an open-ended check, a blank check. Um, Meaning that it's not by any means necessary that you want to conduct your resistance, but by all available means. And what that means is that not all means are available to you. Someone was saying that in the chat, fled from nowhere. Uh, yes, even a civilian from a colonial power would be off limits because your act of resistance will be determined, it will be legally called an armed conflict. And a non-international armed conflict, or even an international armed conflict, if you are like dealing with the occupation or something like that, is not free from the limitations of the laws of war. So the Geneva Conventions will ban you from killing civilians, from executing people that have surrendered, from detaining people and violating their human rights. That is why. So, for example, in the case of Hamas and Israel, when you are in an armed conflict, you are allowed to detain members of the opposite armed force for security reasons, right? So there's no prisoners of war in non-international armed conflicts, but you can detain people for security reasons. So if you see a soldier, you can detain them because they're a security threat, right? Um, so this has come up a lot with like people in the fact that some of the Israeli hostages are members of the Israeli military. Um, Theoretically, yes, uh, some of those members of the Israeli armed forces could be counted as detained by a party to the armed conflict if they were being treated in accordance with human rights standards, right? And they were being detained for security reasons and not, say, for bargaining chips in a broader, process. So um, I don't think that we should be advocating for resistance through any means necessary, because I don't accept the killing of civilians, the killing of people in detention, torture, as valid means of resistance. Right. So, sorry, Edward SVM says, does the principle of proportion apply to resistance? So, if a civilian dies, but military necessity applies. Yes, absolutely. Proportionality applies, meaning that when a armed group engaged in an armed conflict attacks a military target, they also cannot be attacking the civilians. They need to be attacking the military target. But once they do, they need to be claiming that the military advantage from that strike is proportionate to the civilian casualties. So, for example, Um, take October 7th, right? In terms, if you measure that not in the paradigm that we have so far, which is like the paradigm of terrorism, and you measure it in the in the context of this is an armed conflict between Hamas and Israel. Uh, well, number one, yes, there were instances where Hamas attacked military facilities that would have been valid targets in an armed conflict. But once those soldiers were wounded, they stopped being targets. Like if you there's video evidence that shows that um um uh well, actually I don't know if there's video evidence on this, so I won't say that. But once a soldier um is wounded and you find them wounded, you take over the base and you cannot execute them because that's a war crime. And then of course you cannot go town to town chasing civilians to kidnap them because taking hostages is illegal or to execute them. So that's a violation of the principle of distinction, right? So it is absolutely the principles of international humanitarian law apply to resistance because resistance will often take the form of armed conflict, and armed conflict is regulated by international humanitarian law. So as to the second part of the question, um, when does it cross the line to terrorism? So terrorism is a category that is very difficult to apply in international law because it has no international legal definition. In international law, we don't define terrorism because the reality is that when you put any two states together in one room and say who's a terrorist, someone's terrorist will be someone else's freedom fighter. So, for example, there's a lot of arguments in Latin America about whether states can be terrorists and there can be such a thing as state terrorism. And of course, many states that could be accused of state terrorism disagree. And so no one can ever agree on a definition of what is terrorism. So every definition of terrorism that exists is self contained, either in domestic law or in a specific tribunal. It's not universal in its application. So I think it's a very impractical category to measure when things cross a threshold because what you're doing is you're crossing a threshold from international law to domestic law, and it's difficult to compare them. Um, but if you want to make a comparison based on international legal categories, you can argue at what point does resistance become a war crime? That's the same category. And they become a war crime when you attack someone who's not a valid target, who's a protected person under international law. The wounded, the sick, civilians, people out of combat, detainees. And so, under the domestic laws of several countries, many things that we would describe as war crimes are criminalized as terrorism. So that's what happens in Peru, for example. In Peru, most war crimes are criminalized as acts of terrorism, and so we put people in jail not for war crimes in our armed conflict, but for terrorism, which I don't necessarily think is it's not bad. It's just um, you're choosing not to apply international law. You should at least say that those acts of terrorism are war crimes under international law. Um, so yeah, I don't think the category of terrorism is a very practical category. Um, but if you want to have any kind of like definition, um, most definitions come with it's a violent act, usually meant to create fear in the civilian population for a political objective, right? And so under that, you can make your own definition of when does it cross the border into terrorism, or you can use Israeli law or whatever you want, but it's not a very practical definition to measure that when does it cross the line, um, because since we're talking about international law, what crosses the when you cross the line of international law, you commit war crimes, and those war crimes can be conceived as acts of terrorism in domestic law, but that's a different set of rules. I don't know if I answered the question, but let me know if you have any more questions. Um, so Fleck from Nowhere said, yeah, resistance doesn't justify all acts. Um, and then Fled from nowhere says, switching subjects to the Shining Path controversy. Would you agree that the Peruvian state committed war crimes in that conflict as well as the insurgents, although possibly fewer in number? Yeah, absolutely. I've written about this quite a bit. I think in the Peruvian armed conflict, both the Shining Path and the Peruvian state committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. There are arguments out there. Actually, I'm not sure about her nationality, but I think she's Peruvian. Um, she teaches at the University of Baltimore. Nusta Carranza. I think she's Peruvian American. She argues, for example, that the Peruvian government. I'm going to share her profile here so that you can look into her research. She argues that the Peruvian government actually committed genocide because one of the things the Peruvian government did was they started a campaign that had nothing to do with the armed conflict, really. But the Peruvian government started a campaign of family planning, and in this campaign of family planning, um, many indigenous women were forcefully sterilized against their will. There's a lot of discussion in Peru as to what this is, but preventing births is one of the actus reus of genocide. And so, if you were to argue that the government was actually trying to eliminate in part the indigenous population of Peru, then that would constitute genocide. Um, I don't have a settled position on this. But Nusta Carranza does, and she's written very interesting articles about that, so you might want to read her stuff. But yes, absolutely, the Peruvian government committed war crimes, horrible war crimes, committed torture, committed crimes against humanity, and so did the Shining Path. And according to the Truth Commission report, um, Shining Path committed more crimes than the Peruvian government. But the tragedy of the Peruvian armed conflict is that the average victim was Quechua speaking, so non native Spanish speaker from the Andes. And so the most vulnerable portions of society were the ones that suffered the brunt of all of these war crimes by the Shining Path and the government. So yeah, absolutely. I do think very strongly though that actually that the Peruvian government committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. The main problem being that the way we prosecute things in Peru, because terrorism has such a big appeal as a concept that labels someone a terrorist and adds the level of disgust that you usually put into like who you call a terrorist, um, then we usually prosecute Shining Path crimes as terrorism under domestic law, but we prosecute government crimes as crimes against humanity under a mix of domestic and international law. So there's a perception in Peru that international law only applies against the government, and that's unfortunate. It's made international law very unpopular in Peru. Razanov says maybe because calling something a war crime entails an implicit admission that there is a war going on. Yeah, true. That happened in Peru a lot actually. Um, so they call it terrorism instead. That is exactly what happens in Peru. We can talk about the concept of terrorism under international law in a separate stream. That would actually be an interesting topic. Um, Let me see who else. Boulevard of Dreams. Maybe one topic which I find to be extremely important under the context of past, present, and future, especially past though. Although I think we totally got sidetracked on the topic, so I don't think we actually talked about that, but it's fine. This was actually very interesting, so thanks for your questions. Boulevard of Dreams says, which is not talked about often, is succession responsibility. Say X and Y become independent from state A, but if state A has already committed genocide vis-a-vis another state B, the succession of X and Y in the responsibility of A vis-a-vis B is completely different from their succession in the treaties of A. Can you maybe talk a little bit about this tricky topic? I am not entirely sure if I'm following. Um, but okay, let me read this again. X and Y become independent from A, but if state A has already committed genocide vis-a-vis another state B, this is of A and B is completely different. Oh yeah, because okay, so there's different ways in which states succeed one another. You can have say Russia inheriting the Soviet Union. The main inheritor of the Soviet Union. It inherits all of the Soviet Union stuff. And there are other states that inherit some stuff, but not all. like Ukraine, right? So um, I guess the main answer to this question is it depends on who the specific international person is. Like I don't think that um, in your example, I don't think that X and Y, considering that A still exists, would be responsible for all of the actions that A did against B. Now, there are members within X and Y that could have been under the control of A that did commit war crimes, and they individually can be prosecuted. But I'm not sure that X and Y would as states. So yeah, it is tricky. Maybe we should talk about succession another time as well because it's a big topic. Um, okay, so I think I've answered all the questions so far. Um, but let me know if I left someone out. I am actually gonna remove that image. I love that I can do that now. Like, this is so practical. Um, okay. Um, okay. So, one thing uh, that I will encourage you to do one last time, because I will need to wrap up soon because it's getting late for my plans. Um, please remember that we now have a shiny brand new Discord channel thanks to Boulevard of Dreams. Um, and that will allow you to continue these discussions in the Discord channel. You can find the link either on the in the about page of my Twitch page of my Twitch channel, or further up in the chat. Um, and I will be in that Discord channel often to like answer your questions there and engage, and we can get to know each other eventually. Like if you connect your Twitch account to the Discord server, you will be able to access perks for subscribers. So, oh, thanks, Boulevard of Dreams, for sharing the link. Um, so yeah, the idea is for the community to continue growing. Sorry, I'm gonna get sidetracked a little bit because Iconoclast says, "I'm sorry to ask. I asked the question above about settlers, but I had to disconnect. If you've been able to answer, please let me know. I'll rewatch the stream or the one on last Sunday." Can you repeat the question? Just so I answer it really quickly. Oh, there you go. I was wondering if you might have answered if armed settlers in the West Bank are considered civilians or if they are considered occupiers and therefore fair game. I think you should watch the stream on international humanitarian law that we just did last Sunday. I explained there what these people are. I would argue that they are directly participating in hostilities, and therefore they they would be targetable by the other party to the conflict. The question is who that party is, because the state of Palestine doesn't have an armed force and it is not using force against Israel. Um, so I guess you could argue that they could be directly participating in hostilities in the armed conflict against Hamas, but Hamas is not operating in the West Bank. So this is the weird situation where you have people participating in hostilities in the West Bank, but there's no one on the other side shooting at them. That's why this is such an unfair situation. Right? But yes, they are definitely participating in an armed conflict. Um, I guess my only question would be whether to consider them a militia that belongs to Israel formally or de facto, or if they are an independent group that is and therefore we should analyze whether they are organized enough to form a party to the armed conflict, right? Um, so I guess that would be the. Um, I think even if they aren't a party to the armed conflict, they are still directly participating in hostilities, and so theoretically it would be, as you say, like fair game if they are directly participating in hostilities at that time. Again, you should watch the IHL stream from last week. Um, Edward says, didn't give handout guns to them. What do you mean handout guns to them? Sorry, Edward, as a VM, I didn't understand that. They didn't give handout. Um, oh, Ben Gvir. Didn't Ben Gavir hand out guns to them? Okay, yeah, yes. Oh, yeah, you're right. I had forgotten about that. So yeah, you could theoretically consider them a militia then in favor of Israel. So yeah, yeah. Um, I would say they are directly participating in hostilities for sure. The whole situation with the settlers at some point, when Israel is so directly contributing to their war effort, if not because they have direct control, like overall control over them, uh, it would be because they are failing in their duty to protect Palestinians from the harm of settlers, at least like these militia settlers. They would be Israel would be in violation of international law by itself, like not just the settlers committing war crimes or anything, or committing human rights violations, but Israel itself would be doing something illegal by not arresting them. This is something that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, for example, has expanded a lot on. But yeah, I you reminded me of the handing out of guns. So yeah, yeah, likely they would be like some sort of like militia acting on the side um, this is actually um, a, a a valid question because a lot of people wonder what Hamas is, and for some people, oh, fled from nowhere, no problem. Thanks for coming. Some people think that Hamas is a militia acting on the side of Palestine, which I don't really understand. I don't think Hamas acts as part of the structure of the Palestinian state. So I don't really understand that. I think there's a separate conflict between Israel and Hamas, as opposed to like the armed conflict between Palestine and Israel. But I mean, it's out there. I don't have the final answer on this. Some people do think that Hamas is part of Palestine, and the settlers are part of Israel. I disagree. I think there's a more legitimate claim to say that the settlers are part of Israel than Hamas being part of Palestine, because like Fatah, the current controlling party of Palestine, hates Hamas, right? So tricky. But okay, so before I wrap this up, I do want to remind you, please join the Discord server. It'll be fun. We want to have as many people as we can there so we can have conversations going forward. If you don't speak English, or you speak English but you would rather speak in Portuguese and Spanish, there are specific channels for people that follow me from my country or my region that speak Portuguese and Spanish. I will also be there talking in Portuguese and in Spanish. Um, and yeah, it'll be fun, I promise. I'm very excited about this. I'm very happy to see the community continue to grow. I'm really thankful for all of you to like dedicate your weekend afternoon, your Sunday afternoon, especially on a long weekend. At least in the UK, it's a long weekend to learn about international law. It always like fascinates me that there is this like huge interest on the discipline. I'm very happy that I am able to provide this Q&A for you guys. And yeah, I mean, see you on the Discord. And thank you so much. Please tell your friends so that they subscribe or follow the channel. Love these sessions. Thank you, Edward SVM. I also love doing this, so I'll keep on doing it for the foreseeable future. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I will be ending the chat soon, and I will be putting all of the stuff that we've discussed here in the Discord channel. Okay. Thank you so much again. See you on Wednesday when we will play The Last of Us once again. So if you want to see me kill zombies and you want to use the shiny new emotes that I made, like this one, um, here you go, like this one, um, you can join me on Wednesday. Thanks for another very interesting stream. We're kind of privileged in here. Well, to be honest, your questions challenge me a lot. It is difficult to like answer such different topics in such a short time, and also in one single stream. So I'm learning a lot as well, because the way you ask the questions requires me to be able to answer the question, right? I'm not giving an interview in a news show where you can sort of like BS your way out of answering a question that you don't like. I'm trying to help you guys. So in asking me these questions, you're actually helping me as well. So this feedback loop that we're creating is very valuable. It's almost like class-like, as if we were in a class. But and I do believe that the learning experience is a collective experience. When you learn, I learn. So this wouldn't if this were just me. I think this is the great advantage of Twitch over YouTube. If this were just me recording myself and uploading to YouTube, it wouldn't be as advantageous, it wouldn't be as cool. I am really happy with the way this is working, and I think we can do even more on the Discord channel. I imagine, say for example, we could go into a voice channel on Discord with subscribers, and we could talk, literally have like a little seminar of our own. And I think what we're building here is, I don't want to sound too excited or anything, but like it's almost revolutionary in that it's a little bit of academia in the digital age, in a safe space where we can discuss and we can engage. So um, YouTube also has a live feature in case someday Twitch is down. Yes, YouTube has a live feature. Um, it is trickier to use, and also I'll be honest, the monetization policies are a lot harder to get to. So I am able to um, like I wouldn't I'm not really doing this because of the monetization, but it really does help a little bit. So yeah, that's mainly why I also there's no direct. That's one thing that I've noticed. There's no direct YouTube connection with my PlayStation 5, so I would not be able to do what I'm doing with The Last of Us on YouTube. Um, Razanov says that I'm gonna be called a revolutionary leader soon. Uh I mean, when the revolution comes. No, I'm kidding. um, I I don't know. It is a little bit revolutionary. Um, in the sense that it's bringing academia, at least someone in academia, uh, to an everyday context and everyday conversation, um, in a very free environment. There's no syllabus here. I don't dictate what you learn. You just ask me questions, and I find that so refreshing. Boulevard of Dreams says you could stream on both websites at the same time. I think I cannot now because I'm an affiliate at Twitch, so I cannot do YouTube as well as an affiliate at Twitch. Um, so yeah, I think I cannot do that anymore. But yeah, I mean, again, you say that it is a privilege to be here. For me as well, it is such a different and such a refreshing digital experience. So much better than Twitter, for example. Definitely better than Twitter. And I'm very comfortable. I'm very happy to keep seeing your names week after week, like Boulevard of Dreams, Razanov, Iconoclast. There's also the Silly Series was here often. Um, I mean, there's a bunch of you that show up regularly, and I find that so humbling and so amazing that you guys are dedicating your time for this because you find value in it. So thank you so much for coming. I'm having a blast, and I will keep on doing this for as long as you guys show up. So just it would really help me if we can make a bigger community so that we can have uh, more fun. I think I'm very excited about where the Discord is going to grow, where this channel is going to go, and yeah, just in general. Thank you so much for doing this. This is an amazing thing that I get to do, and I will see you on Wednesday so that we can kill some zombies. Okay? Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Uh, Take care. Oh, wait. Sorry. Flit from Nowhere says if I'm aware of a Harvard trained psychiatrist who streams lectures and interviews semi regularly on site. I don't know him, but I'll check it out. Okay, now I'm going. Bye. Thank you so much. Bonne soirée, Iconoclast. Thank you, Razanov. Thank you for coming. Thank you all. Bye.